7 years, 2,555 days of sleeping in separate wings of the same house. 7 years of polite nods across breakfast tables, of never once feeling his hand linger on hers, of existing as strangers bound by vows neither wanted. Until tonight. Tonight, the Duke of Ravenscroft stood at her chamber door, his voice breaking as he whispered words she'd waited 7 years to hear. "May I hold you?" But how did they get here? What could make a man avoid his own wife for 7 years? And what happened on this particular night that finally shattered the walls between them? Our story begins not with tonight's question, but with a wedding 7 years ago. A wedding where the bride knew, even as she spoke her vows, that her husband would never love her. England. 1863. The bells of St. George's Church rang out across London's Hanover Square, announcing a union that society had been whispering about for weeks. Lady Violet Everley, daughter of the financially ruined Earl of Harrington, was marrying one of England's wealthiest and most mysterious noblemen, the Duke of Ravenscroft, Lord Henry Ashford, the man they called the Ice Duke. Violet stood at the altar in her white satin gown, her hands trembling as she held a bouquet of white roses. She was 23 years old, and this was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. But as she looked at the man beside her, tall and imposing in his formal black coat, she saw nothing but coldness in his dark eyes. He had barely looked at her during the entire ceremony. When the priest asked him to repeat his vows, Henry's voice was steady and emotionless, as if he were reading from a legal document rather than pledging his life to another person. "I, Henry James Ashford, take thee, Violet Elizabeth Everley, to be my wedded wife." The words were correct, but there was no warmth in them. No promise of love or companionship, just duty. Cold, hard duty. When it was Violet's turn, her voice wavered. "I, Violet Elizabeth Everley, take thee, Henry James Ashford, to be my wedded husband." She meant every word, even though her heart was breaking. She had agreed to this marriage to save her family from complete financial ruin. Her father's debts had piled so high that they were on the verge of losing everything. Their country estate, their London townhouse, even the family name was at risk. The Duke needed a wife of proper breeding to provide him with an heir. Violet's family needed money to survive. It was a business arrangement, pure and simple. But somewhere deep inside, Violet had hoped that maybe, just maybe, affection could grow between them over time. That hope died on their wedding night. The reception at the Duke's London mansion was a grand affair. Hundreds of guests filled the ballroom, drinking champagne and congratulating the newlyweds. Violet smiled until her face hurt, accepting well wishes from people who had once snubbed her family when their financial troubles became public knowledge. Now as the Duchess of Ravenscroft, she was suddenly worth their attention again. But the man who had given her this new title remained distant throughout the entire celebration. He danced with her once because tradition demanded it, but his hand on her waist felt impersonal, almost reluctant. He performed his duties as host with perfect correctness, but Violet noticed how he carefully avoided being alone with her. As the last guest departed, and the servants began cleaning up, Violet's lady's maid helped her change out of her wedding gown. Her new chambers at Ravenscroft House were beautiful. Elegant furniture, silk curtains, a large canopy bed. Everything a duchess could want. Everything except a husband who cared for her. She sat at the dressing table, brushing out her long chestnut hair, when she heard the connecting door between her chamber and the Duke's open. Her heart jumped. This was it, her wedding night. Despite the coldness of the day, despite everything, a small spark of hope flickered in her chest. Perhaps in private, away from society's watching eyes, he would be different. Perhaps he would be kind. Henry entered, still dressed in his wedding clothes, though he had removed his jacket. He stood by the fireplace, not looking at her, his jaw tight with tension. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally he spoke. "I believe we should establish an understanding, Lady Violet." His use of her title rather than her name sent a chill through her. This marriage is a practical arrangement. I require an heir to continue the family line. You needed financial security for your family. Both objectives can be met without unnecessary complications. Violet's hands stilled on her hairbrush. What kind of complications do you mean, Your Grace? Emotional ones. He turned to look at her then, and Violet was struck by the emptiness in his eyes. I have no interest in the sentimental aspects of marriage. I have arranged for you to have chambers in the East Wing. They have excellent light and a lovely view of the gardens. You will have your own staff, your own space. As Duchess, you will manage the household and represent the family at social functions. In return, you will want for nothing materially. And what of companionship? Violet asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. What of partnership? What of us? There is no us, Lady Violet. There is a duke and a duchess performing their respective duties, nothing more. He moved toward the door, clearly eager to leave. I will require an heir eventually, but not intimacy, not the pretense of affection. When the time comes for that obligation, it will be handled as clinically and respectfully as possible. Until then, I suggest we maintain appropriate distance. Appropriate distance, Violet repeated, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. You mean we are to be strangers living in the same house? Precisely. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. I am trying to be kind, Lady Violet. I am being honest about what I can and cannot offer. Many women in your position would prefer this arrangement. I am not many women, Violet said, a spark of anger giving her courage. I am your wife. In name only, he replied, and that is how it will remain. Good night, Lady Violet. He left, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded as final as a prison door locking. Violet sat alone in her beautiful chamber, still in her nightgown, staring at the connecting door that led to her husband's room. She heard the sound of a key turning. He was locking it, locking her out, on their wedding night, and so it began. The pattern that would define the next 7 years of Violet's life. They were strangers who happened to share a last name and an address. Nothing more. The years passed slowly. Violet learned to manage the vast Ravenscroft household, earning the respect of the servants with her kindness and efficiency. She became involved in charity work, helping the poor in London's East End, visiting orphanages and hospitals. She created a life of purpose for herself, because her husband gave her nothing else. Henry remained distant and formal. They dined together when he was in London, discussing the weather and estate business with perfect politeness. Sometimes weeks would pass when she barely saw him at all. He was always busy with Parliament, with his investments, with anything that kept him away from home. Away from her. Violet grew from a hopeful young bride into a woman who had learned to accept loneliness as her constant companion. She was 30 years old now, 7 years of marriage behind her, and she had long ago given up hoping that things would change. She had resigned herself to this half-life, this existence of being married yet utterly alone. The connecting door between their chambers remained locked, symbolizing everything that would never be between them. But life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it, and sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves become the very prisons that trap us. 7 years of silence was about to end, because today, on their 7th wedding anniversary, that neither of them would acknowledge, a letter would arrive that would change everything. The morning of their 7th anniversary began like every other morning in the Ravenscroft household. Violet woke alone in her chamber, dressed with the help of her maid, and made her way down to the breakfast room. The September sun streamed through the tall windows, casting golden light across the polished mahogany table. It was a beautiful morning, the kind that promised a perfect autumn day, but Violet barely noticed. She had learned long ago not to hope for beauty in her life, even when it was right in front of her. Henry was already seated when she entered, reading the morning newspaper with his coffee. He glanced up briefly, nodded in acknowledgement, and returned to his reading. This was their routine. 7 years had worn a groove so deep that neither of them seemed capable of stepping out of it anymore. Violet took her seat at the opposite end of the table, far enough away that they could pretend they were dining alone. A servant poured her tea and placed a plate of toast and eggs before her. She thanked him softly, then sat in silence, moving food around her plate without really eating. 7 years ago today, she thought, we stood in a church and promised forever to each other, and here we are sitting at the same table, miles apart. She wondered if Henry even remembered the date. Probably not. Their wedding day had meant nothing to him then. Why would its anniversary mean anything now? Still, some foolish part of her heart had hoped. She had chosen her dress carefully this morning, selecting the deep burgundy silk that she knew brought out the color of her eyes. Henry had once mentioned years ago in passing that burgundy suited her. It was such a small comment, barely worth remembering, but Violet had held on to it like a treasure. Any scrap of personal attention from him felt like a gift. He had noticed the dress when she walked in. She had seen his eyes flicker over her for just a moment before he looked away. But he said nothing. Of course he said nothing. "The weather is pleasant today," Henry said without looking up from his newspaper. His voice was neutral, conversational, the voice of a man making polite small talk with an acquaintance. "Indeed," Violet replied, stirring sugar into her tea, though she had already added some. "Perhaps I shall walk in the gardens this afternoon." "That sounds agreeable," he said, and that was it. That was the extent of their conversation. The weather, the gardens, safe, meaningless topics that required nothing of either of them. Violet felt the familiar ache in her chest, the one that never quite went away. 7 years of this. 7 years of polite nothings and careful distance. She was 30 years old now, and sometimes she felt ancient. What kind of life was this? What kind of marriage? She thought of other women she knew, women who laughed with their husbands, who touched their arms affectionately in public, who spoke of their spouses with warmth and fondness. She would never have that. She had accepted it long ago, but acceptance did not make it hurt any less. The sound of rapid footsteps in the hallway broke the silence. The butler, Morrison, appeared in the doorway, his usually composed face showing signs of distress. In his hand was a letter, the wax seal broken, and even from across the room Violet could see the black border around the paper. "A death notice." "Your Grace," Morrison said, addressing Henry with urgency. "This just arrived by special messenger. It concerns your uncle, Lord Richard." Henry set down his newspaper immediately, his expression shifting from polite indifference to sharp attention. He took the letter and read it quickly, and Violet saw something she had not seen in years. Genuine emotion on her husband's face, pain, worry, fear. His hand trembled slightly as he lowered the letter. "Uncle Richard is gravely ill," Henry said, his voice tight. "He has taken a bad turn. They do not expect him to last more than a few days. I must go to him immediately." Violet's heart clenched, not just at the news itself, but at the raw emotion in Henry's voice. She had almost forgotten he was capable of feeling anything. Lord Richard had raised Henry after his parents died, when Henry was just 16. Richard was more than an uncle. He was the closest thing to a father Henry had. "I am so sorry," Violet said softly, and she meant it. Whatever coldness existed between her and Henry, she would not wish this pain on anyone. "Is there anything I can do?" She hesitated, then added carefully, "Shall I accompany you? I could help in some way, or simply be there if you need—" She trailed off as Henry shook his head, already standing, already mentally preparing to leave. "That will not be necessary," he said, his tone returning to its usual formality despite the crisis. "I will travel faster alone. Uncle Richard's estate is a 3-day journey. I will leave within the hour." Of course, Violet thought, feeling foolish for even offering. Why would he want her company? In 7 years he had never wanted her company. Why would a family emergency change that? But then something unexpected happened. Henry looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in months. His dark eyes met hers across the length of the breakfast table, and for just a moment Violet saw something flicker in their depths. Longing? Regret? She could not be sure. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual guarded expression. But it had been there. She was certain of it. "Thank you for the offer," he said quietly, and there was something different in his voice, something almost vulnerable. "It is kind of you." Then he turned and strode from the room, calling for Morrison to have his things packed immediately. Violet sat alone at the breakfast table, her tea growing cold, her heart racing from that brief moment of connection. In 7 years, Henry had never thanked her for anything with such sincerity, never looked at her with anything other than polite indifference. What did it mean? Probably nothing, she told herself firmly. He was upset about his uncle. He was not thinking clearly. It meant nothing. But her foolish heart did not want to listen to reason. An hour later, Violet stood in the entrance hall watching as servants loaded Henry's luggage onto the carriage. She had not planned to come down to see him off. They did not do such things, but something had pulled her from her chamber, some need to see him one more time before he left. Henry appeared at the top of the stairs, dressed for travel in a dark coat and boots. He descended quickly, pulling on his gloves, his mind clearly already on the journey ahead. He was halfway to the door when he noticed Violet standing there. He stopped, surprised to see her. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the marble floor of the entrance hall. The morning light from the windows illuminated them both, and Violet thought how much they looked like two figures in a painting. Beautiful, perfect, and completely separate. "Safe travels," Violet said, her voice barely carrying across the distance between them. Henry nodded. He turned to go, then hesitated. He turned back, taking a few steps toward her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion already lining his face, the worry in his eyes. He reached out his hand, and for one breathless moment Violet thought he was going to touch her. Really touch her. Not the brief impersonal contact required for social dancing or helping her from a carriage, but a real, intentional touch. His hand hovered near hers, trembling slightly. She saw him swallow hard, saw the war happening behind his eyes. Then his hand dropped to his side. He pulled back. The walls came up again. "Take care of yourself, Violet," he said. And the use of her first name without the formal lady before it sent a shock through her system. He had not called her simply Violet in years. Before she could respond, before she could even process what was happening, he turned and walked out the door. Violet moved to the window and watched as his carriage rolled down the drive and disappeared into the misty London morning. Her hand pressed against the cool glass, and she realized she was shaking. 7 years, she whispered to her reflection in the window. 7 years, and he says my name. 7 years, and he almost touches my hand. 7 years, and I am still foolish enough to hope. She let out a bitter laugh. What a fool I am. What a pathetic, desperate fool. She should go back to her routine. She had correspondence to answer, household accounts to review, a meeting with the housekeeper about the upcoming dinner party they were hosting next week. She had a life to live, even if it was a lonely one. But instead, Violet found herself walking through the empty halls of Ravenscroft House, seeing it as if for the first time. This massive mansion with its dozens of rooms and priceless artwork and centuries of history. This house that should have been a home but had never felt like one. She passed the music room where a pianoforte sat unused and dusty. She passed the library with its thousands of books, most of which she had read in her desperate attempt to fill the empty hours. She passed bedchambers prepared for children who had never been conceived, because that would require her husband to actually touch her. The house was a beautiful mausoleum, a monument to everything that would never be. 3 days, Violet thought. Henry would be gone for at least 3 days, possibly longer depending on his uncle's condition. 3 days alone in this enormous house. 3 days to accept once and for all that her marriage was never going to be anything more than a legal arrangement. 3 days to kill whatever hope still flickered stubbornly in her heart. She found herself standing outside Henry's private study, a room she had never entered in 7 years of marriage. He kept it locked, and she had always respected that boundary. It was his private sanctuary, the one place in the house that was completely his own. But today something was different. The door was slightly ajar. In his haste to pack and leave, Henry must have forgotten to lock it. Violet stood in the hallway staring at that partially open door. She should walk away. A wife should respect her husband's privacy. But was she really a wife? After 7 years of distance and silence, after 7 years of sleeping alone and eating in polite silence, and pretending their marriage was normal, did she owe him that respect? Her hand was on the door handle before she made a conscious decision. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was wrong. She knew it was wrong. But she also knew that she was dying inside, slowly suffocating in this life of polite nothings and careful distance. If there was any answer to the question of why her husband could not stand to be near her, any explanation for 7 years of coldness, it might be in this room. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The study was exactly what she expected. Masculine, organized, filled with books and papers and the smell of leather and tobacco. His desk was neat, everything in its place. But there, in the corner of the room, she saw something unexpected. A cabinet, its door hanging open, and inside, barely visible in the shadows, the edge of what looked like journals and papers. Violet's breath caught in her throat. She should leave. She should leave right now and forget she ever saw this. But her feet carried her forward, as if they had a will of their own. She reached the cabinet and looked inside. Journals, dozens of them dating back years. And beneath them letters, bundles of letters tied with ribbon. And sketches, beautiful detailed sketches. Her hand trembled as she reached for the top journal. As she pulled it out and saw the date on the first page, her knees nearly gave out. It was dated the day after their wedding. 7 years ago. 7 years of journals, right here in this room, documenting the life of a man she thought she knew. A man she thought felt nothing. What secrets was her cold, distant husband keeping? What had he been writing all these years, while she lay alone in her chamber, believing herself unwanted and unloved? Violet looked toward the door of the study, making sure she was still alone. Then she opened the journal and began to read. What she found would change everything. Violet's hands trembled as she opened the first journal. The leather was worn smooth from handling, as if Henry had picked it up many times over the years. His handwriting filled the pages, neat and precise, just like everything else about him. She sat down in the chair by the cabinet, unable to stand as she began to read words that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her marriage. The first entry was dated the night of their wedding. I cannot let her close, Henry had written. Everyone I love I lose. My parents, Elena, everyone. I will not curse Violet with my affection. I will not doom her to the same fate. Better she thinks me cold than dead. Violet's breath caught. Elena. She had heard that name whispered once or twice in society, always followed by pitying looks in Henry's direction. But no one had ever told her the full story. Henry had certainly never mentioned it. She flipped through more pages, her heart pounding as pieces of a puzzle she had not known existed began to fall into place. Year 1, month 3, another entry read. Violet smiled at the gardener today while discussing the roses, a genuine, beautiful smile that lit up her entire face. I haven't seen her smile like that at me in months, because I've given her no reason to. Because I am a coward who watches her from windows like a ghost haunting his own life. She deserves so much more than this. So much more than me. Violet pressed her hand to her mouth, tears burning her eyes. He had been watching her. All this time she thought he did not care at all, that she was invisible to him. But he had been watching. She grabbed another journal from further along, dated 3 years into their marriage. The entries were longer here, more detailed, as if Henry's restraint was cracking under the weight of his feelings. I stood outside the connecting door last night, he had written. I heard her crying. Soft, muffled sobs that she tried to hide in her pillow. It took everything in me not to unlock that door, not to go to her, not to hold her and beg her forgiveness for the loneliness I've condemned her to. But I cannot. I will not curse her with my affection. Everyone I love dies. I cannot bear it if something happened to Violet because of me. Better she hates me and lives than loves me and dies. The tears were flowing freely down Violet's face now. 7 years. 7 years she had believed herself unwanted, unloved, not enough. But he had been suffering too. Suffering in silence, torturing himself with some terrible belief that his love was a curse. What had happened to make him believe such a thing? She needed to know. She needed to understand. She set aside the journals and reached for the bundle of papers beneath them. Letters. Dozens of letters, all in Henry's handwriting. She untied the ribbon with shaking fingers and looked at the first one. "My dearest Violet," it began, and her heart nearly stopped. She read letter after letter, each one a declaration of love that had never been sent. "My dearest Violet, today you wore yellow and looked like sunshine incarnate. I wanted to tell you how beautiful you looked, but the words died in my throat as they always do." Another read, "My dearest Violet, I watched you with the children at the orphanage today. You would make the most wonderful mother. I hate myself for denying you that. I hate myself for so many things." The most recent letter, dated just yesterday, made her sob aloud. "Tomorrow marks 7 years since I made you my wife and condemned you to loneliness. You deserved so much more. You deserved love, and I am a coward who loved you from the first day and was too afraid to reach for you. Forgive me, my darling. Forgive me for the 7 years I stole from us both." Violet let the letter fall from her fingers as she wept. He loved her. He had always loved her. And she had never known. 7 years of pain and loneliness, all because of some tragedy in his past that had convinced him love was dangerous. 7 years wasted, because neither of them had the courage to speak the truth. But what was this tragedy? Who was Elena? What had happened to make Henry so afraid? She wiped her tears and reached for the sketches at the bottom of the cabinet. What she saw took her breath away. They were drawings of her. Beautiful, detailed sketches done with obvious care and skill. Violet in the garden, her face turned toward the sun. Violet reading by the window, lost in a book. Violet sleeping, her hair spread across the pillow. That last one made her gasp. When had he seen her sleeping? Had he unlocked the door sometimes and just watched her? The thought should have felt invasive, but instead it felt intimate. Proof that his feelings were real, that all those years of distance had cost him as much as they had cost her. She found older sketches beneath those, from before their marriage. A young woman with golden hair and a bright smile. The name Elena was written in small letters at the bottom. So this was the woman from Henry's past. She was beautiful, radiant even in pencil and paper, and she was dead. That much was clear from the way Henry had written about her in the journals. But how had she died? And why did Henry blame himself? Violet dug deeper into the cabinet, searching for answers. At the very bottom, she found a newspaper clipping yellowed with age. The headline read, "Tragic accident claims life of Lady Elena Morland." The article was dated 9 years ago, 2 years before Violet had married Henry. She read quickly, her heart racing. Lady Elena had died in a carriage accident while travelling to London for her engagement ball. She had been engaged to Lord Henry Ashford, the Duke of Ravenscroft. The carriage had lost a wheel on a dangerous stretch of road and plunged into a ravine. Lady Elena had died instantly. Violet sat back in the chair, the pieces finally coming together. Henry's first love had died on her way to celebrate their engagement. And somehow he blamed himself for it. He believed his love had cursed her, had caused her death. So he had decided never to love again, never to risk another person's life with his affection. And then he had been forced into a marriage with Violet, a marriage he had tried desperately to keep distant and cold, not because he did not care for her, but because he cared too much. Because he was terrified that loving her would kill her too. "Oh, Henry," Violet whispered, pressing the journals to her chest. "You foolish, broken, wonderful man. You've been protecting me from a curse that doesn't exist. You've been punishing us both for a tragedy that was never your fault." She sat in his study as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, surrounded by evidence of 7 years of silent devotion. Henry loved her. He had always loved her, and she had suffered in loneliness, believing herself unwanted, when all along he had been suffering too. 7 years of wasted time, 7 years of pain that neither of them had needed to endure. But it was not too late. Henry would be gone for 3 days. 3 days for her to decide what to do with this knowledge. 3 days to find her courage. When he returned, she would not let him hide anymore. She would not let him retreat behind his walls of ice. She would fight for them, for the marriage they should have had all along, for the love that had always been there, buried under fear and grief and terrible misunderstanding. Violet stood and carefully returned everything to the cabinet, leaving it exactly as she had found it. Then she walked to her chamber with new purpose in her step. 7 years of silence was enough. When Henry came home, everything was going to change. Violet spent the rest of that day in a daze, moving through her usual routines while her mind spun with everything she had discovered. She met with the housekeeper, approved menus for the week, answered correspondence, all while Henry's words echoed in her head. "I loved you from the first day. I will not curse her with my affection. Everyone I love dies." By evening she had made her decision. She would not wait passively anymore. She would not spend another 7 years in silence. When Henry returned, she would confront him with the truth. She would tell him that she had read his journals, his letters. She would tell him that his curse was not real, that Elena's death was a tragic accident, nothing more. And she would tell him what she had been too afraid to say for 7 years, that she loved him, that she had always loved him, even through the loneliness and pain. That night, Violet went to the connecting door between their chambers. It had been locked from Henry's side for 7 years, a physical barrier that symbolized everything wrong with their marriage. But now she understood why he had locked it, not because he did not want her, but because he wanted her too much, because he was afraid that if he opened that door, if he let himself love her, she would die like Elena had. It was irrational, born of grief and guilt, but it was real to him. And it had shaped every decision he had made for 7 years. Violet turned the key on her side of the door, unlocking it. It was a small gesture, but it felt enormous. When Henry came home, this door would be open. She would leave it open. An invitation. A declaration. A promise that she was not afraid of his love, even if he was. Meanwhile, miles away, Henry sat beside his uncle's bed in a draughty manor house that smelled of sickness and approaching death. Lord Richard Ashford had raised Henry after his parents died in a riding accident when Henry was 16. Richard had been stern but fair, teaching Henry everything he needed to know about managing the dukedom. But Richard had also been there through Henry's darkest days. When Elena died, when Henry had fallen apart completely, Richard had held him together. Now Richard was dying, and Henry felt that old familiar fear clawing at his chest. Everyone he loved eventually left him. It was the pattern of his life. The curse he could not escape. "Henry," Richard's weak voice pulled him from his thoughts. The old man's eyes were cloudy with pain, but his gaze was sharp. "There's something I need to tell you. About Elena's death." Henry's body went rigid. "Uncle, you should rest. Save your strength." "No," Richard said firmly, struggling to sit up slightly. "I've kept this secret for 5 years, and it's eaten at me. I need to tell you before I go. You need to know the truth." Henry's heart pounded. "What truth?" Richard took a shaky breath. "Elena's death wasn't an accident, Henry. At least not the way you think. Her brother confessed to me on his deathbed 5 years ago. He had gambling debts, terrible debts that would have ruined the family. He took out a life insurance policy on Elena without her knowledge. Then he paid someone to tamper with her carriage." The words hit Henry like a physical blow. "What?" he whispered, his face draining of color. "He killed his own sister for insurance money," Richard continued, tears running down his weathered face. "The authorities never knew. He made it look like an accident. And he died taking that secret to his grave. But he told me first. Wanted someone to know what he'd done. I should have told you years ago, but I didn't know how. You were so broken after her death, and then you convinced yourself you were cursed. I thought knowing the truth might make it worse." Henry stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. His hands shook as he gripped the bedpost. "You're saying her death had nothing to do with me? Nothing to do with loving her?" "Nothing at all," Richard said gently. "It was greed and desperation, a brother's terrible choice. You were never cursed, Henry. You never caused anyone's death. And that good woman you married, Violet, she's paid the price for your misplaced guilt. 7 years she's lived in that house like a ghost. 7 years she's been the perfect duchess while you kept her at arm's length, afraid your love would kill her." Henry sank back into the chair, his head in his hands. 7 years. 7 years he had punished Violet for a crime that had never happened. 7 years he had denied them both happiness because of a lie he had told himself. A curse that never existed. "Oh God," he whispered. "What have I done, Violet? What have I done to Violet?" "You've wasted 7 years," Richard said bluntly, with the honesty of a dying man who had nothing left to lose. "But you still have time. Go home to your wife, Henry. Tell her the truth. Tell her you love her. Stop running from the best thing that ever happened to you. Stop punishing her for tragedies she had nothing to do with." Richard's breathing became labored, and Henry gripped his uncle's hand. "Uncle, rest now, please." "Promise me," Richard gasped. "Promise me you'll stop this foolishness. Promise me you'll give that girl the love she deserves." "I promise," Henry said, tears streaming down his face. "I promise, Uncle, I'll make this right." Richard smiled weakly and closed his eyes. "Good boy, now go. Don't wait for an old man to die. Go home to your wife." But Henry could not leave. He sat beside his uncle's bed through that night and into the next day. When Richard finally passed peacefully in his sleep, Henry wept for the man who had been more father than uncle. But even in his grief, one thought consumed him. Violet. He had to get home to Violet. He had to tell her everything. He had to beg her forgiveness for 7 years of coldness and distance. He had to pray that somehow, after all the pain he had caused her, she might still care enough to give him a chance. Henry rode through the night, pushing his horse harder than he should have, driven by desperate urgency. The 3-day journey home became 2, as he barely stopped to rest. His uncle's funeral arrangements had been handled quickly, and now all Henry could think about was getting back to Ravenscroft House. Back to Violet. His mind raced with everything he needed to say to her. How did you apologize for 7 years of cruelty disguised as protection? How did you explain that every cold word, every distant look, every locked door had been an act of cowardice, not indifference? He had rehearsed the words 1,000 times during the journey, but none of them felt adequate. Still, he had to try. He owed her that much and so much more. When he finally reached London, it was nearly midnight. The house was dark except for a single light burning in an upstairs window. Violet's chamber. His heart leaped. She was still awake. The servants had already retired for the night, so Henry let himself in quietly. He stood in the entrance hall, travel-stained and exhausted, looking up at that distant light. This was it. This was the moment that would determine the rest of his life. He could continue as they had been, maintaining the cold distance that had defined their marriage, or he could climb those stairs, knock on her door and risk everything by telling her the truth. There was really no choice at all. Henry climbed the grand staircase slowly, his legs heavy with exhaustion and fear. When he reached the hallway outside Violet's chamber, he paused. Light spilled from under her door. He could hear the soft sound of movement inside. She was awake. His hand reached for the connecting door between their rooms, the door he had kept locked for 7 years. But something was different. He turned the handle, expecting resistance. The door opened. It was unlocked from her side. Henry's breath caught. When had she unlocked it? What did it mean? His heart pounded as he stood at the threshold between their two worlds. 7 years of separation, and all that stood between them now was his own fear. He raised his hand and knocked softly on her door. The movement inside stopped. Silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then he heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, and there stood Violet in her nightgown, her long chestnut hair falling loose around her shoulders. She looked beautiful and vulnerable, and Henry felt his carefully rehearsed words dissolve into nothing. They stared at each other across the threshold. 7 years of longing and pain and unspoken truth hung in the air between them. "Henry," Violet said softly, and the sound of his name on her lips made his chest ache. "You're back early. I didn't expect you until tomorrow. I know I have no right to disturb you at this hour," Henry began, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion. But before he could continue, Violet interrupted him. "I found your journals," she said quietly. "Your letters. The sketches. I went into your study while you were gone, and I found everything." Henry felt the blood drain from his face. She knew everything. All his secrets, all his feelings laid bare. He had been exposed, and he had no defenses left. "Violet, I can explain. Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice broke, and he saw tears shining in her eyes. 7 years, Henry. 7 years you let me believe I was nothing to you, that I was unwanted, that I wasn't enough. Why didn't you tell me the truth?" The pain in her voice shattered something inside him. "Because I was a coward," he said, his own voice cracking. "Because I lost Elena and I blamed myself. I thought I was cursed, that everyone I loved would die. I thought if I kept you at a distance, if I never let myself love you, you would be safe." "Safe?" Violet's anger flared. "You thought loneliness would keep me safe? You thought 7 years of cold silence was protection. I've been dying inside that whole time, Henry, slowly suffocating in this marriage, believing I was fundamentally unlovable. How was that keeping me safe?" "You're right," Henry said, and suddenly his legs could no longer hold him up. He sank to his knees before her, this proud duke reduced to a broken man at his wife's feet. "You're right about all of it. I was cruel. I was selfish. I told myself I was protecting you, but I was only protecting myself from the possibility of loss. And in doing so, I lost 7 years we could have had together." Tears streamed down his face, and he no longer tried to hide them. "My uncle told me the truth before he died. Elena's death wasn't my fault. It was never my fault. There was no curse. Only my own fear and guilt creating a prison that trapped us both." Violet stood above him, her own tears falling freely now. "All this time," she whispered, "all this suffering, for nothing." "Not for nothing," Henry said, looking up at her with desperate eyes. "Because it brought me here, to this moment, to finally having the courage to tell you the truth." He reached out, his hand trembling, not quite touching her. "I have no right to ask anything of you. I know that. But may I—" His voice broke completely. "May I hold you just once? I need to know if you can forgive me. I need to know if there's any chance that after everything I've done, you might still—" He couldn't finish. The words were too big, too terrifying. The question hung in the air between them. 7 years of pain and loneliness compressed into this single moment. Henry knelt before his wife, tears on his face, his heart laid bare, asking permission for the most basic human connection, asking if 7 years of coldness had killed whatever feelings she might have once had for him, asking if it was too late for them. Violet looked down at the man she had married 7 years ago, the man who had been a stranger, then a distant husband, and now knelt before her as something else entirely, broken, honest, real. Her hand lifted slowly, reaching toward him, and everything hung on what she would do next. Violet looked down at Henry kneeling before her, his face wet with tears, his hand reaching toward her but not quite touching. 7 years of anger and hurt and loneliness should have made her turn away. He deserved her rejection. He deserved to feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused her. But as she looked at this broken man, she saw something else. She saw the journals filled with longing. She saw the letters he had written but never sent. She saw the sketches he had drawn while watching her from afar. She saw 7 years of his suffering too. They had both been prisoners. They had both been alone, and life was too short to waste another single day. She reached down and touched his face, her fingers gentle on his tear-stained cheek. "Yes," she whispered. "You may hold me." Henry's breath left him in a sob. He surged forward, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her close as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had been spinning out of control. Violet's hands went to his hair, holding him as he cried against her. 7 years of walls crumbled in that embrace. 7 years of distance vanished. They sank to the floor together, neither willing to let go. Henry held her like she was precious and fragile, like she might disappear if he loosened his grip even slightly. His face was buried in her shoulder, and she could feel his tears soaking through the thin fabric of her nightgown. "I'm sorry," he kept saying, the words tumbling out between sobs. "I'm so sorry, Violet. I'm so sorry." She held him tighter, her own tears flowing freely now. "I know," she whispered. "I know you are." They stayed like that for long minutes, just holding each other, letting 7 years of grief and loneliness pour out. Finally, Henry pulled back enough to look at her face. His hands came up to cup her cheeks, his thumbs wiping away her tears even as his own continued to fall. "I love you," he said, his voice raw and honest. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you walking down that aisle toward me. Every day for 7 years I have loved you. I watched you from windows. I stood outside your door at night. I drew pictures of you and wrote letters I was too afraid to send. I loved you so much it terrified me." Violet's breath caught. Hearing him say it out loud, seeing the truth of it in his eyes, was overwhelming. "I didn't know," she said. "All this time I thought you found me lacking. I thought there was something wrong with me." "No," Henry said fiercely. "Never. You are extraordinary, Violet. You are kind and strong and patient beyond measure. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. You deserved a husband who told you every day how remarkable you are. Instead, you got a coward who hid behind walls and called it protection." "You were hurt," Violet said, her hand stroking his hair. "You lost someone you loved, and you were terrified to love again. I understand that now." "Understanding doesn't make it right," Henry replied. "I stole 7 years from you. 7 years you can never get back. How can you even look at me after what I've done?" Violet was quiet for a moment, thinking about her answer. "Because I love you too," she finally said, and watched his eyes widen with shock and hope. "I think I always have, even when I tried not to, even when I was angry and hurt and lonely. Some part of me never stopped loving you, Henry. I hated myself for it. I called myself a fool, but I couldn't stop." Henry made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You love me? After everything?" "Yes," she said simply. "I don't know if I should. I don't know if it's wise. But I do." He pulled her close again, burying his face in her hair. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Probably not," she agreed, and felt him laugh against her shoulder. "But you have me anyway." They held each other in silence for a while, learning the feel of each other after so many years apart. Finally, Henry spoke again, his voice tentative. "What if the fear comes back? What if I start to retreat again into old patterns? 7 years of walls don't come down all at once." "Then I'll pull you back," Violet said firmly. "I won't let you hide any more, Henry. I won't let you lock that door between us again. So if you start to pull away, I'll fight for you. For us. Promise?" he asked, like a child seeking reassurance. "I promise," she said. No more silence. No more distance. We talk to each other. We're honest with each other. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Henry nodded against her shoulder. Then slowly, carefully, he pulled back and looked at her. His hand came up to cup her cheek again, and this time when he leaned forward she knew what was coming. Their lips met in a kiss that was tentative at first, testing, asking permission with every moment. Then Violet's hand slid to the back of his neck, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened. 7 years of longing poured into that kiss. 7 years of denied passion and buried feeling. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "Stay with me tonight," Violet whispered. "Just to sleep. Just so I'm not alone anymore." "I'll stay," Henry promised. "Tonight and every night after, if you'll have me." They moved to her bed, lying down together for the first time in their marriage. Henry pulled Violet close, her head on his chest, his arms around her. It felt strange and wonderful and right. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness, "for giving me another chance, for not giving up on us." Violet pressed a kiss to his chest right over his heart. "Thank you for finally asking to hold me." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, 7 years of coldness finally beginning to thaw. Morning light filtered through the curtains, and Violet woke to a sensation she had not felt in 7 years. Warmth, not just the warmth of blankets, but human warmth. A body next to hers. Henry lay beside her, still asleep, his hand holding hers even in sleep, as if he was afraid she might disappear. His face looked younger in rest, the lines of tension smoothed away. She watched him quietly, this man who was her husband, but who she was only now beginning to truly know. When his eyes finally opened and found hers, she saw vulnerability there. Fear that last night had been a dream, that the fragile connection they had rebuilt might shatter in the light of day. "Good morning," she said softly. Relief flooded his face. "Good morning." They lay there in awkward silence for a moment. 7 years of distance could not be erased in one night. They had held each other, yes. They had confessed their feelings. But they were still essentially strangers, learning how to be together. Henry cleared his throat. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "Would you have breakfast with me? Not in the dining room with the length of the table between us, but here or in the sitting room. Together, really together." Violet smiled, her heart warming at the request. "I would like that very much." The next weeks unfolded slowly, carefully. They were learning each other, building something new from the ruins of their cold marriage. Henry asked permission for everything. "May I take your hand while we walk in the garden? May I sit beside you instead of across from you at dinner? May I tell you about my day?" At first Violet found all the asking strange, but she came to understand it was Henry's way of making sure he never assumed, never took her for granted again. He was giving her choice in everything, something he had never done before, and she appreciated it, even as she gently encouraged him that he did not need to ask for every small thing. They talked, really talked, about everything. Henry told her about his childhood, about losing his parents at 16, about the weight of becoming a duke so young. He told her about Elena, about how young and naive they had both been, about the guilt that had consumed him after her death. Violet told him about her own loneliness during their marriage, about the charity work that had given her purpose when she felt purposeless, about the nights she had cried herself to sleep, wondering what was wrong with her. The conversations were not always easy. There was pain to work through, resentment to acknowledge, but they worked through it together, and slowly trust began to build. The household staff noticed the change immediately. The Duke and Duchess, who had barely acknowledged each other for 7 years, were now seen walking hand in hand through the gardens. They sat close together at dinner, their heads bent in conversation. Sometimes laughter could be heard coming from the library where they spent their evenings. The servants whispered hopefully that perhaps finally, after all these years, the cold marriage was becoming a real one. Henry courted Violet properly, the way he should have done from the beginning. He brought her flowers from the garden every morning. He complimented her dresses, her hair, her smile. He asked about her interests and really listened to her answers. When Violet mentioned missing her charity work with the orphanage, Henry not only encouraged her to continue, but asked if he could join her on her next visit. When she shyly showed him some of her watercolor paintings, something she had taken up to fill the lonely hours. He was genuinely impressed and commissioned a proper art studio to be set up in the East Wing. He was attentive in ways he had never been before, and Violet found herself falling deeper in love with this version of her husband. The real Henry, not the cold mask he had worn for so long. Physical intimacy grew slowly between them. First held hands during their walks, then Henry's arm around her waist as they stood looking out at the gardens. Stolen kisses in quiet corners of the house. Each touch was precious, meaningful, because they both knew how close they had come to never having this at all. One evening, 3 weeks after Henry's return, they sat together in the library after dinner. Henry was reading aloud from a book of poetry, while Violet did needlework, content just to be near him and hear his voice. When he finished the poem, he set the book aside and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Violet," he said quietly, "I have a question to ask you, and I need you to answer honestly. No matter what you think, I want to hear. Just the truth." She set aside her needlework, giving him her full attention. "Of course." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "May I court you?" "Truly court you? The way I should have 7 years ago? I want to take you to the theater. I want to dance with you at balls. I want to walk with you in the park. I want everyone to see that I adore my wife. And then, when you're ready, when you feel you know me well enough to make that choice, I would like to ask if I may truly be your husband, in every way." The meaning behind his words was clear. He was asking permission to move their relationship forward, but only when she was ready. Only when she felt comfortable. Violet's heart swelled with love for this man who was trying so hard to do things right this time. "Yes," she said. To all of it, yes. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Violet had imagined. Henry was attentive and romantic, taking her to the theater and the opera, walking with her through Hyde Park, dancing with her at society balls. The Tun was shocked to see the Ice Duke transformed into a devoted husband. Whispers followed them everywhere, but neither cared. At home, their physical closeness continued to grow. Kisses became longer, more passionate. Henry's hands would linger on her waist, her shoulders, her face, but always he stopped before things went too far, always giving her space to decide when she was ready for more, until one night, 6 weeks after his return, when Violet took his hand and led him from the library to her chamber. She turned to face him at the door, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. "Henry," she said quietly, "I've waited 7 years. I think that's long enough. I'm ready to truly be your wife if you still want me." Henry's eyes darkened with desire and something deeper. Love, pure, honest love. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough. "I don't want you to feel pressured." "I'm certain," she said, reaching up to cup his face. "I want this. I want you. I want us to finally have the wedding night we should have had 7 years ago." He pulled her close, kissing her deeply. "Then yes," he whispered against her lips. "Yes to everything. Yes to you. Always yes to you." That night they finally consummated their marriage. It was tender and passionate and healing all at once. Henry was gentle and patient, asking permission with every touch, making sure she was comfortable, that she wanted this as much as he did. And when they finally came together, it felt like the final piece of their fractured marriage clicking into place. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, skin against skin, hearts beating in rhythm. Henry held her close, his fingers trailing through her hair. "I love you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have said it 7 years ago. I should have said it every day since, but I'll say it now, and I'll say it every day for the rest of our lives. I love you, Violet, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." Violet pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I always did, even when I was trying not to, even through all the pain. Some part of me always loved you." They fell asleep like that, truly husband and wife at last, their bodies and hearts finally united after 7 long years of separation. And for the first time since their wedding day, both of them slept peacefully, wrapped in each other's arms, knowing they had finally found their way home. 1 year later, Violet stood in front of the mirror in her dressing room, smoothing down the emerald green silk of her gown. It was their 8th wedding anniversary, but really it was their first. The first one that mattered, the first one they would celebrate together as a true husband and wife. So much had changed in the past year that sometimes Violet had to pinch herself to believe it was real. The cold, empty mansion had become a warm home filled with laughter and love. The distant stranger she had married had become her best friend, her lover, her partner in everything. Society had watched the transformation with fascination, gossiping endlessly about what had caused the Ice Duke to thaw so completely. But Violet and Henry did not care what society thought. They were too busy making up for lost time, building the life they should have had from the beginning. Tonight, Henry had planned a special anniversary dinner, just the two of them. No servants hovering, no formality, just husband and wife celebrating their love. Violet touched the necklace at her throat, the one Henry had given her that morning. It was her mother's necklace, a beautiful sapphire pendant that her family had been forced to sell during their financial troubles years ago. Henry had tracked it down and bought it back for her. "You should have something from before," he had said as he fastened it around her neck. "To remember who you were and to remind you how far we've come." She had cried, of course. Happy tears this time, the kind she shed often these days. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting her maid. But it was Henry who entered, devastatingly handsome in his evening clothes, his dark eyes warm as they took her in. "You look beautiful," he said, and the compliment still made her blush even after a year of hearing such words from him regularly. "As do you," she replied, smiling. He crossed the room to her, taking her hands in his. But there was something different in his expression tonight. Nervous excitement barely contained. "I have your anniversary gift," he said, "but I'm suddenly terrified to give it to you." Violet laughed. "Henry, you already gave me my mother's necklace this morning. You've more than exceeded any expectations. This is different," he said. "This gift isn't from me. It's from you." "To both of us." She looked at him, confused. "I don't understand." Henry took a deep breath and she realized his hands were actually shaking slightly. "I've been keeping a secret for the past month. Just a small one. I wanted to be absolutely certain before I told you." "Certain about what?" Violet asked, her heart beginning to race. Instead of answering, Henry took her hand and placed it gently on her own belly. His eyes met hers, shining with unshed tears. "Dr. Bennett confirmed it yesterday when he examined you for that headache you had. He asked me not to tell you, said it was your news to share." But I could see he was pleased. "Violet, you're pregnant. We're going to have a baby." The world seemed to stop spinning. Violet's hand pressed harder against her stomach, as if she could feel the life growing there just by wishing it. We're... She couldn't form the words. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "We're going to have a baby?" Henry nodded, his own tears falling freely now. He dropped to his knees before her, just as he had that night a year ago when he had asked to hold her. But this time there was no pain, no fear. Only pure, overwhelming joy. He pressed his face against her stomach, his arms wrapping around her waist. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me another chance. Thank you for forgiving me. Thank you for this, for everything." Violet's hands went to his hair, holding him close as she cried. "We get this," she said through her tears. "After everything, after all the pain and loss and wasted years, we get this. We get to be parents. We get to have a family." Henry looked up at her, his face wet with tears but radiantly happy. "I was so afraid I'd destroyed any chance we had at this, that I'd wasted so much time that we'd never have everything we should have had." "But we didn't waste it," Violet said, pulling him to his feet so she could hold him properly. "Those 7 years were hard, yes, but they taught us things too. They taught us not to take each other for granted. They taught us to appreciate every single day we have together. They taught us that love is worth fighting for, even when it's difficult. Henry cupped her face in his hands, looking at her with such love it took her breath away. "You're going to be the most amazing mother," he said. "I've watched you with the children at the orphanage. I have seen how patient and kind you are. Our child is so lucky to have you." "And you're going to be a wonderful father," Violet replied. "You're going to be present and loving and everything a child needs." "What if I'm not?" Henry asked, and she heard the old fear creeping into his voice. "What if I fail them the way I failed you for 7 years?" Violet shook her head firmly. "You won't, because you've learned from those mistakes, because you're not that man anymore, and because I won't let you retreat into fear again. Remember? I promised I'd pull you back if you started to hide. I'm holding you to that promise, Henry." He smiled, the fear fading from his eyes. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You asked me if you could hold me," she said simply. "You were brave enough to knock on that door and ask for forgiveness. That took more courage than you know." They held each other for a long moment, both processing the news, both imagining the future stretching out before them. A future with a child, maybe more children, a house filled with laughter and love, everything they had almost lost forever. "Boy or girl?" Henry asked. "Do you have a preference?" "Healthy," Violet said immediately. "That's all I want. A healthy baby and a husband who loves me. And I already have one of those things." Henry laughed and kissed her. "You have both. You'll always have both. I promise you that." 6 months later, on a cold March evening, Violet went into labor. Henry refused to leave her side, despite the doctor's protests that childbirth was no place for a husband. "I missed 7 years of my wife's life," Henry said firmly. "I'm not missing this." So he stayed, holding Violet's hand through every contraction, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, whispering encouragement when she was certain she could not go on. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Henry's old fears tried to surface. What if something went wrong? What if he lost her? But he pushed those thoughts away. That was the old Henry, the one who lived in fear. The new Henry had faith. Faith in Violet's strength, faith in their love, faith that they had not been given a second chance only to have it snatched away. When their daughter finally arrived, tiny and red-faced and screaming with healthy lungs, Henry wept. The doctor placed the baby in his arms, and he looked down at this perfect little person they had created. She had Violet's nose and his dark hair, and she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Hello, little one," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your father, and I promise you I will never take a single day with you for granted. I will tell you every day how much I love you. I will be present for every moment I possibly can. You and your mother, you're my whole world." Violet, exhausted but radiant, held out her arms. Henry carefully placed their daughter in them, then sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around his wife, looking down at their child. "She's perfect," Violet whispered. "Just perfect." "Like her mother," Henry replied. He looked at Violet, this woman who had saved him from himself, who had refused to give up on him even when he had given up on himself. "May I hold you both?" he asked, the question that had changed everything now a beloved habit between them. Violet smiled, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Always. You never have to ask any more, Henry. You're always welcome, always wanted, always loved." Henry gathered his wife and daughter into his arms, and in that moment, surrounded by love, he finally understood something important. The curse he had feared for so long had never been real. The only curse had been his own fear. And love, real love, was not a curse at all. It was a blessing, the greatest blessing. They named their daughter Elena Violet, honoring both the past and the present, the love that was lost and the love that was found. And as Henry held his family in his arms, he made a silent vow. He would spend every day of the rest of his life making sure they knew how loved they were. He would never waste another moment. He would never let fear keep him from holding the people he loved. 7 years of silence had ended with one brave question, and that question had given him everything. Dear listener, 7 years. That's how long it took for a simple question to change everything. May I hold you? 4 words that broke through 7 years of silence and pain. Sometimes we build walls thinking we're protecting others, when really we're just protecting ourselves from the possibility of hurt. Sometimes we accept loneliness thinking we don't deserve more, when the truth is we deserve all the love in the world. But healing doesn't have a timeline. Love doesn't follow a schedule. And it's never ever too late to ask the question you're afraid to ask. To speak the truth you've been hiding. To reach for the connection you've been denying yourself. If you're waiting for the perfect moment, stop waiting. The perfect moment is now. If you're hiding behind walls, step out. Let yourself be seen. Let yourself be vulnerable. If you think it's too late, if you think too much time has passed, if you think too much damage has been done, remember the Duke and his Duchess. Remember that 7 years of coldness melted with one honest conversation. Remember that it's never too late to begin again. 7 years of silence ended with one brave question. What question are you afraid to ask? What truth are you afraid to speak? What love are you afraid to reach for? Life is short. Time passes whether we use it wisely or waste it. Don't waste another day. Don't let another year pass in silence. Ask the question. Speak the truth. Reach for love. You deserve it. We all deserve it. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this story. If this tale of second chances and healing touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel. Like this video and leave a comment telling us what you thought. Share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late for love. Your support means the world to us and keeps us motivated to bring you more stories of hope, redemption, and unforgettable love. At the end of this video, you'll see another story suggestion from our channel. Click it and discover another emotional journey that might touch your soul just like this one did. Until next time, dear listener, may you find your courage, may you ask your question, may you find your love. With all our hearts, thank you for listening.